3 minutes, 3:55 to Lakeshore Drive, outbound 28. Inbound Ryan, 18 minutes, 95th to downtown. I-57, 16 minutes, I-80 to the merge Bishopport, 17. The northbound tri-state ramp for the outbound Eisenhower is heavy. That's traffic. I'm Jim Talamonte on AM 560, The Answer.
Chicago's Morning Answer continues next in our AM 560 Weather Center. Our meteorologist, Steve Williams.
Today, mostly sunny, windy, and a high 38. Partly cloudy, breezy tonight, low 17. Sun and clouds for tomorrow, the high 22. Sunny to partly cloudy, still a cold day on Saturday, the high Saturday at 27. I'm Steve Williams on AM 560, The Answer.
30 at O'Hare. Next news, 7:30. Chicago's Morning Answer with Dan and Amy continues next on AM 560, The Answer.
From the Matrix Home Solutions studios, this is Chicago's Morning Answer on AM 560, The Answer.
Listen to AM 560, The Answer, online at 560theanswer.com, on the AM 560 mobile app, and your Alexa-powered smart speaker, on TuneIn, iHeart, and radio.com. This is Chicago's Morning Answer with Dan Proft and Amy Jacobson on AM 560, The Answer.
Top of the morning, Dan and Amy. Jen Psaki, White House spokesperson, saying yesterday Senate impeachment trial will go forward. The Senate can multitask. They can move President Biden's agenda while also working to convict President Trump in impeachment 2.0. So that presents two questions. One is, can the Senate actually convict and remove, well, he's already been removed. Can they convict the president once he's left office? Can they? And then the second question, of course, is should they, based on the charges approved by the House? The can they. I go back to, again, former appellate court Judge Michael Luttig, who was a Supreme Court shortlister in the Trump administration. A president cannot be impeached after he leaves office, writes Judge Luttig. Therefore, were the House of Reps to impeach the president before he leaves office, he tweeted this out, obviously, before the House voted, the Senate of the United States could not thereafter convict the former president and disqualify him from future public office. He would no longer be the incumbent in the office of the president. The very concept, Judge Luttig goes on, of constitutional impeachment presupposes the impeachment, conviction, and removal from office of a president who is, at the time of his impeachment, incumbent in the office of president from which he is removed by the impeachment. Article 2, Section 4 of the Constitution, verbatim, the president, vice president, and all civil officers of the United States shall be removed from office on impeachment for and conviction of treason, bribery, or other high crimes and misdemeanors. Shall be removed from office.
Yeah. He's not in office.
And
anymore.
so Luttig and Dershowitz both argue that once you're out of office, you by definition can't be removed from office, so it violates the predicate for the conviction. Alan Dershowitz, writing in the Wall Street Journal, and by the way, I interviewed Professor Dershowitz on Friday on the topic too. You can check that out on the podcast of my show. He actually addressed, both in his piece in the Wall Street Journal and with me, this precedent I raised of William Belknap, who was the Secretary of War under Ulysses S. Grant, who was tried after he had resigned his office and the administrations had changed hands. And Dershowitz notes, well, one, he wasn't the President of the United States. He was never elected to anything, so it's not exactly on point. Two, while he was definitely guilty of numerous impeachable offenses, the Senate voted in favor of a procedural motion affirming its jurisdiction to try Belknap's impeachment, but 24 senators who believed he was guilty voted to acquit him 6 months after he left his post and the administration changed hands. They voted to acquit on jurisdictional grounds, even though they knew and believed he was guilty of the underlying impeachable offense. Dershowitz, writing, a close vote nearly a century and a half ago doesn't establish a binding precedent. In point of fact, he thinks a more compelling precedent is the House's decision not to impeach Richard Nixon After he left office in 1974 to avoid certain impeachment and conviction, there was no movement to continue the process. So let's explore both of those questions now with our friend Andy McCarthy, former Chief Assistant U.S. Attorney in Manhattan, contributing editor at National Review, author of the bestseller Ball of Collusion, The Plot to Rig an Election and Destroy a Presidency. Andy, thanks for joining us. Appreciate it.
Good morning. How are you?
Good morning. So just on the can the Senate do it? Is it constitutional? That question, where do you come down?
Yeah, I think it's constitutional. I have a lot of respect for Mike Luttig and Alan Dershowitz, but I just think they're wrong on this one. I think the world of Luttig, but I thought his column on this was underwhelming, because where he ultimately comes out is who knows what the Supreme Court would say about all this. I think with Alan, it's interesting that he thinks that the only existing precedent actually cuts against him. So he says, well, it's not much of a precedent. And then he has a case that really wasn't a case, which is the House and Nixon. And he says that which was not a formal impeachment move is somehow a more binding precedent than an actual impeachment that took place in connection with Belknap and the other case. I wrote a book about impeachment back in 2014. For some reason, in 2014, nobody wanted to talk about impeachment. I can't imagine what that could have been.
Right.
But
yes, actually, just as a quick aside, you actually raised in that book instances where you thought President Obama had committed impeachable offenses. Just to make that point,
I did, and I also in the 2016 campaign, because there is no requirement that a person be in office to be impeached, and you have this disqualification provision, I argued that the Republicans in the Congress ought to explore impeachment proceedings on Hillary Clinton based on Benghazi and the emails. I didn't have any expectation that they would actually impeach her, but I thought it might concentrate the mind on the fact that she wouldn't be qualified for office if she were impeached under circumstances where I actually thought she had committed impeachable offenses. But in the book, I point out that the contemporaneous example that the framers had when they wrote the impeachment provisions in the Constitution was Edmund Burke's impeachment of Hastings, who was the Governor General of Bengal. That was going on at the same time the Constitution was being drafted. It was referred to by the framers. Hastings was out of office at the time that Burke impeached him, and nobody thought that was a reason that you couldn't go forward. Ultimately, he was acquitted, and I think ultimately, if they're foolish enough to go forward with President Trump, he'll be acquitted as well. But I think that's a different question from whether they can do it. I think they absolutely shouldn't do it, but can they do it? I think they can do it.
Well, what's the evidence against President Trump, and will they be able to convict on just that?
Well, yeah, that's a great question. I mean, I've really I've struggled with this because I think that the impeachment act that they wrote really doesn't match what he did and has a lot of legal problems. And part of the reason I think he'd certainly be acquitted is this is just like simple common sense now rather than the law. And it goes the same for when you do prosecutions in ordinary criminal cases. But what you want to do as the prosecutor presenting a case to a jury is to give them reasons to want to convict, because convicting is not always an easy thing to do, even if the evidence is there. And what has happened here is they've basically given, in a case which is uphill because you have to get a supermajority of the Senate, 2/3, to convict and have the other penalties for impeachment, they've given them reasons to acquit that have nothing to do with President Trump. So we not only have this profound constitutional issue that you guys have been talking about that reasonable minds can differ on. You have they decided to make it incitement to insurrection, and incitement as a concept in federal criminal law, not that federal criminal law governs this, but it should influence it. You can't have incitement without an explicit, unambiguous call to violence that is imminent and probable, which, there's nothing that Trump did. As much as I think what Trump did was wrong, I don't think there's anything that he said that comes close to that.
Right.
And then the issue of insurrection, reasonable minds can differ on whether it was actually an insurrection or not. There's a difference between, the rhetorical use of the word insurrection and what it means as a matter of law. And there's a lot of dispute on that. But Republicans must know that the reason that the Democrats wanted to use insurrection in the impeachment article is because they're hoping to invoke Section 3 of the 14th Amendment to disqualify not only Trump from public office, but other Republicans. They want to lay the groundwork so that, people can go into court and say, if you were one of these Republicans who was against having Congress count the votes on January 6th, that you're somehow responsible for the rioting that went on and you should be disqualified from public office. So it seems to me that they're giving the Republicans a lot of reasons to vote against this. And I think if there was an impeachment case here, and I think there is one, the problem was not whether President Trump incited to insurrection. The problem is dereliction of duty, principally, because whether you call what he did, incitement, provocation, egging on, urging, whatever you want to describe it as, and whether you decide what happened is insurrection or rioting or, a protest gone awry, the fact is President Trump knew about it and wouldn't take any action to protect people, protect the seat.
Yeah, but in his defense, he tweeted out, we're not this party of, we're law-abiding citizens. Don't, retreat. He did tweet out, because they can use that in his defense, and then the video that he put out.
Yeah, he's the commander-in-chief, not the tweeter-in-chief. So when you're the commander-in-chief of the armed forces of the United States and the seat of government is under siege, you have to act. You have to protect the seat of government.
Yeah.
And he not only, if you want to talk about his tweets, while people were descending on the Capitol, he publicly rebuked Pence, which is just indefensible. So to my mind, the case against Trump is what he did for those hours when he knew the Capitol was under siege. And I think any commander who did what Trump did would be up against a court-martial for dereliction of duty.
I'm not defending his treatment of Pence rhetorically or in Twitter form. And I agree that he may have been slow on the uptake, but there's a lot of countervailing, complicating evidence to suggest that Capitol Police didn't take help from the federal government that was made available during the preparation for January 6th, that we don't know what McConnell and Pelosi knew and the actions they did or didn't take, what was transmitted from federal law enforcement to the respective sergeants at arms, to Pelosi and McConnell, the respective leaders of their chambers. So there's a lot of unanswered questions, not to mention Capitol Police standing down. There's videos of Capitol Police taking a rather lackadaisical attitude to trespassers in the Capitol. So it's hard to anticipate those things. It's hard to know exactly what's happening in real time. And then obviously whether it was Pence or whether it was Pence at the behest of Trump to scramble the National Guard, that ultimately happened. So I don't know about that dereliction of duty, at least at the level of impeachable. But I wanted to get your take on something else as well, because it's part of being a good lawyer, as you obviously are, is being a good legal strategist. And it seems to me that Republicans and Democrats both have, for different reasons, a lot of incentive to make this a pro forma exercise and dispense with it as quickly as possible. One is because Democrats have an agenda to move. And yes, you can walk and chew gum at the same time, but something is going to remove oxygen from something else. You can't be, tackling something like border security and caravans or the Green New Deal or or COVID-related matters, including a $2 trillion relief package, at the same time as you're impeaching a former president, and expect that all of that is going to get the same level of attention and bandwidth. It's just not going to happen. And for Democrats like Manchin to be talking about considering removing Hawley and Cruz under the 14th Amendment, Section 3 that you were describing, because they did something that other Democrats have done in every election in which a Republican has been elected this century, objected during the electoral certification process, removing them from the Senate. I mean, the backlash that would happen there, they think that keeping Trump in the public's eye is unifying for Democrats and divisive for Republicans. If you made a play to go after Hawley and Cruz to remove them from office, that would be unifying for Republicans, just as right now going after Trump is generating divisiveness among Republicans, to wit, Liz Cheney already facing an announced primary challenger.
Yeah, look, I think the backlash from Republicans for all this is going to be intense, and it's not. I don't particularly have any love lost for President Trump. I supported him for re-election, but I was never crazy about him. So, I'm not going to be rioting in the streets over President Trump, and I don't think other people are either. But that doesn't mean that, that people are not sensing the intensity of the feeling about how this got conducted. It's one thing to say that I don't think Trump proved his case in court, which he didn't. It's quite another thing to say that this new way of doing elections is something that we want to see carried forward into the future and expanded, which is what the Democrats would like to do. And you're getting a large pushback, I think, from Republicans and conservatives because they sense that, the powers that be are trying to shut down all methods of communicating, of speaking, of expressing political dissent, and so on. So I would try to disaggregate to the extent we can the intensity of the feeling of being under siege that Republicans and conservatives are feeling, and President Trump, because I don't think I think President Trump sees them as bound up together, but I don't, and I think a lot of Republicans and conservatives don't. And I think that's why this whole push on insurrection is so important. I don't think it's just Cruz and Hawley. I mean, they have their eyes on all these guys in the House too.
True. Yeah.
And I don't. This is part of the reason what you're raising is part of the reason why I think it's pointless to go forward with this, and there's a lot of downside to it, because you can't remove a guy who's already removed. If you disqualify him, that seems undemocratic. At this point, if he's really as bad as his opposition wants to say, he's not going to be president again anyway, and he's not going to be a factor in the presidential race if they're right. So what's the point of going forward with an impeachment trial, which puts the country and the Congress under a lot of stress in order to disqualify a guy who, is not going to be president again anyhow? I just don't. I see a lot of downside to doing this. I don't really see any upside.
He is Andy McCarthy, former Chief Assistant U.S. Attorney in Manhattan, contributing editor at National Review, author of the bestseller Ball of Collusion, The Plot to Rig an Election and Destroy a Presidency. Andy, thanks for joining us as always. Appreciate it.
Have a great day. Thank you.
Thank you. And he joined us on our turnkey.pro answer line.
The more you listen, the more you'll know. This is Chicago's Morning Answer. Morning Answer on AM 560. The Answer.
Balance of Nature's fruits and vegetables in a capsule. Changing the world, one life at a time.
It's really fantastic. I'm pretty active sports-wise, and no muscle strains. I get up in the morning, no stiff back, nothing. I never get sick. I mean, literally, never get sick. And if I feel like there's a little something coming on, I'll take the mega dose. Next day, it's gone. I mean, just my overall health is fantastic. And I plan on continue taking this because I'm convinced that it absolutely contributes to your well-being, to your health. It's keeping you healthy. Let your body do what it's supposed to do.
Experience the Balance of Nature difference for yourself. Right now, Balance of Nature is offering free shipping and 35% off on any new preferred order. Call 800-2468-751. That's 800-2468-751. Or by going to balanceofnature.com and make sure to receive this special radio offer by using discount code Chicago.
And speaking of the impeachment, Liz Cheney, they're already going to primary somebody against her. A state senator, a Republican in Wyoming, is going to be up against her in 2022. So, hey, if you'd like more light, actually, I'm reading the wrong